Samuel sleeps on a simple mat inside an ancient sanctuary to teach that even the quietest moments can carry God's call. A gentle voice echoes his name through the dark sanctuary, showing that God reaches us when we listen heartfully. Elder priest hears the call and rises from his seat to illustrate that God uses trusted guides in our journey. Samuel stands before the priest in the dim light to show that humility opens our hearts to divine direction. He replies, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," to teach that obedience begins with readiness to hear. A soft light illuminates his face as if answering him, showing that God's presence shines when we call out. Night turns into dawn beyond the temple walls to teach that seasons of listening lead to new beginnings. Caressing winds flutter his robe in the courtyard to reveal that God's guidance stirs even the still air. He walks forward with steady steps to show that listening leads us into the path God has prepared. He stands ready in the sacred space to teach that a constant posture of "Here I am" invites divine revelation. God sends Samuel to Jesse's house in Bethlehem to teach that trusting God's instruction leads to unexpected journeys. Samuel invites Jesse and his sons to a sacrificial meal to show that sacred fellowship precedes divine revelation. Samuel sees the eldest son and thinks he's chosen, showing that outward stature can mislead our judgment. God reminds Samuel not to look at appearance but the heart, revealing that true value is found within. Samuel meets Jesse's other sons and finds none, to teach that divine selection defies human expectations. Jesse mentions David out in the fields, showing that greatness often waits in humble places. David arrives carrying water and bread for his brothers to teach that serving others is part of destiny. Samuel anoints David in the midst of his family to show that God's calling can happen in ordinary moments. Oil pours over David's head, showing that sacred anointing transforms the mundane. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon David to teach that God's Spirit empowers when he calls. David picked up 5 smooth stones from the brook to teach that even the smallest preparations, when entrusted to God, can equip us for mighty challenges. David stepped onto the battlefield with a simple sling in hand to show that what seems insignificant to us can carry God's power. The Philistine champion taunted the armies of Israel to show that loud intimidation often masks deep insecurity. While everyone else trembled, David stepped forward in faith to teach that courage grows when we refuse to join the crowd in fear. David placed a smooth stone in his sling to teach that entrusting a simple act to God can wield extraordinary impact. With unwavering trust, David swung his sling overhead to show that bold faith requires action even when the odds seem impossible. The stone flew swiftly through the air, striking the giant's forehead, to teach that God can honor our simplest acts of obedience with miraculous results. At the giant's fall, the Philistine army scattered in panic to show that one act of faith can shatter the strongest hold of fear. Israel's army surged forward in victory to teach that bold faith ignites hope that rallies even the hesitant into action. David stood before the fallen giant to teach that when we surrender our limitations to God, even the mightiest adversaries become stepping stones to destiny. Jonathan ran to meet David to show that genuine friendship overcomes social rank. Jonathan removed his royal robe and gave it to David to teach that true friendship sacrifices personal glory for another's journey. They shook hands under moonlight to teach that promises bound by honor endure every trial. Jonathan pledged loyalty despite his father's anger to show that true allies stand firm amidst opposition. David and Jonathan shared a meal by the campfire to teach that communion nurtures bonds of the soul. Jonathan risked meeting in secret to teach that faithfulness often requires courage beyond comfort. They whispered plans to protect each other, to show that shared purpose strengthens the heart. Jonathan warned David of the king's plot to teach that loyal friends watch over one another's safety. David wept as Jonathan embraced him, goodbye to teach that farewell does not end a covenant of love. David remembered Jonathan's faithfulness to teach that loyal hearts leave a legacy beyond time. David and his men entered the cave to teach that God often leads us into hidden places to test our hearts for mercy. Saul entered the cave unaware to teach that sometimes our enemies unknowingly place themselves in our path of grace. David quietly watched Saul to teach that patience is the first step toward showing mercy rather than striking in anger. David drew his sword to teach that even when armed for battle, true victory lies in choosing compassion. David cut a corner of Saul's robe to teach that mercy can be shown through small, deliberate acts of restraint. David restrained his men from harming Saul to teach that leadership rooted in mercy overrules calls for vengeance. David stepped forward holding the torn fabric to teach that courage to reveal mercy transforms fear into hope. Saul looked at the torn fabric to teach that forgiveness restores dignity even to those who wrong us. Saul recognized the fabric piece to teach that a single act of mercy can open hearts to reconciliation. David wept as he showed mercy to teach that compassion glorifies God and paves the way for unexpected restoration.